5 hours earlier, when Moscow and Astrakhan still slept under a slate sky, 14 drones slid from launch sites deep inside Ukraine and climbed into the night. They lifted with the silent discipline of a trained squadron, not the clumsy hobbyist machines the world imagines, but purpose-built weapons that looked and behaved like a single patient organism. Each carried a warhead in the 40-kilogram class. Each carried one mission: to fly a long way, to find a single hull in a wide sea, and to strike it with devastating precision. For days, Ukrainian and Allied satellites had watched the vessel. What looked from afar like a merchant ship was not a random freighter. Displacing 4,900 gross tons and stretching 110 meters, the Portolia 4 rode the Caspian with a heavy list of intent: nearly 5,000 tons of military materiel, Iranian-supplied components destined for assembly into Shahed-type drones, avionics modules, gyroscopes, navigation units, electrical systems, and crates of 122mm rockets. In battlefield terms, the cargo was a concentrated arsenal, weeks' worth of strikes stored in a single hull, and whoever moved it hoped the distance and the water between would be protection enough. Its captain believed he was safe, anchored inland in the Vuhler-Don shipping canal rather than at Olyaport, a choice he made to reduce the risk of prying eyes and sabotage. He tended to the routine of seamanship with the easy confidence of someone who judged geography to be a shield. The Caspian, 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian front, felt remote. Who could reach a ship there? Who would even want to try? But distance is only protection when the other side is blind. Japan's commercial synthetic aperture radar satellites had already peeled back the cover of night and cloud. SAR does not rely on sunlight. It reads metal and shape and motion, and the analysts stacked passes until the signature of a ship and its anchor chain were unmistakable. They matched hull lines, measured drift angles, and watched the anchorage window narrow. Signal intelligence provided confirmation: deliberate silence, low radar emissions, and communications patterns that betrayed an attempt at invisibility. That silence, paradoxically, became another signal, a temporal aperture through which planners saw the best moment to act. Ukrainian intelligence had mapped the shipment's timing and route. They had watched where the Portolia 4 would settle. They had deliberated over goals and risks. Their objective was surgical: do not detonate the volatile cargo. The last thing they wanted was to set those thousands of components and rockets alight and scatter lethal fragments across the sea and the shore. Instead, the plan aimed to neutralize by destruction and sunken denial, to bury the ship and its contents beneath the Caspian, rendering the materiel unrecoverable and unusable. The drones chosen were long-range kamikaze-style UAVs built on the UJ-26ER platform. Composite airframes, low radar signatures, hybrid navigation systems that combined GNSS and inertial guidance with electro-optical terminal confirmation. All the technical specifics were already in play. They were not improvisations, but purpose-designed tools. Endurance for distance, guidance, robustness for contested environments. 14 airframes comprised the package, 12 attackers and 2 relays. At 5:25, synchronization was confirmed. At 5:45, across agricultural fields and hidden clearings, multi-stage launches unfolded as the machine took shape in the sky. Their flight was choreography. They flew low, between 20 and 60 meters above the sea, blending into sea clutter and evading high-altitude detection. 2 drones climbed higher, to 300 to 500 meters, to serve as signal relays and maintain visual confirmation. To coastal radars, their composite bodies and modest speeds were ghost-like echoes and frequently low-priority blips. Approaches were planned along 4 axes stern-starboard to attack the engine room ventilation and aft deck, bow port to strike the bridge and forward spaces, a midship group to rupture hatches and water lines, and a pair reserved as diversions to slow or deter any rescue attempts. At 10:28 local time, the attack began. The first drone slammed into the aft upper deck. Its warhead tore through thin plates around an engine ventilation shaft. Fire leapt into cable trays and cooked control systems. Generators and fuel pumps stuttered as short circuits cascaded through damaged circuitry. Firefighting systems faltered under the shock. Seconds later, a second impact opened the starboard waterline. Flooding sluiced into lower compartments where heavy equipment and spare parts had been stowed. The Portolia 4 answered the strikes with the physical language of a vessel under shock-shifting loads, smoke, and a sudden unnatural list. The midsection did not wait. 2 more drones struck the cargo area and a hatch cover, punching, tearing, and sending burning debris across a deck now transformed into a battlefield. Connections fractured. Structural beams complained under sudden stress. On the bridge, alarms could not dream of the analytic calm that had preceded this moment. The captain, finally, realized in a sequence of rising clarity that they were not facing salvage or accident. He declared an emergency. Port security scrambled 2 tugboats and a patrol craft. The first vessels to respond would be small, because the canal's restrictions allowed only limited maneuvering. But before their wake had cut the mirrored sea, the 5th drone found the bow near the control room. The blast rendered steering and communications intermittent. Damage control parties, those human lineaments of any ship's survival, moved to stations and fought fires in the dim, choking light. Men shouted through the din, the language of desperation and duty. The attack was not chaos without plan. The sequence had been carefully designed to disable and to drown rather than to burn. Strikes were aimed at beams, ventilation, and water lines to introduce flooding, weaken internal systems, and make sustained firefighting impossible. Diversion drones kept distant patrolling craft uncertain and unwilling to approach at full speed. The risk calculus grew with every unexplained echo and every darting machine that lit the sky. The Portolia 4's list increased. Pumps labored. Compartments that had been dry moments before slipped below the waterline. Steel creaked. And then came the quiet. Not an absence of sound, but the particular hush of a ship that has lost the ability to save itself. Smoke rose in thick columns and then began to thin as oxygen-starved fires suffocated in flooded holds. The captain ordered abandonment, a formal recognition of the failure of control. Lifeboats were launched where possible. Life jackets hugged human torsos as crew slid into the cold expanse. Tugboats and the patrol craft, now edging closer through a field of floating debris and the haze of hydraulic smoke, began to assess salvage and rescue. But the foremost objective of the attack had already been met. The cargo could not be allowed to burn and be scattered. Rather, it would be entombed. When the Portolia 4 finally found its resting depth, thousands of drone parts and crates of ammunition came to lie beneath the Caspian surface. Some components were reduced to ruined metal and ash. Others, intact enough, sat a seabed grave. The controlled nature of the sinking had minimized catastrophic detonation. The water did what the attackers had planned it to do. It carried and cooled. It muffled and concealed. For those watching from command centers and packed screens, photographs and satellite passes would later show a list of wreckage and a dark bruise on the water. For the crews and the tug operators and the men in the lifeboats, the scene would be a different kind of report. A tally of injuries, of loss, of what it means when distance is no longer safety. The operation's aftermath rippled beyond the small circle of those who had planned and executed it. At a strategic level, weeks of anticipated strikes were removed from a theater of conflict by a single, carefully executed wave. Materiel that would have been assembled into machines of war lay inert under meters of water. For Ukraine and its allies, the action was a denial, blunt, effective, and expensive to the other side. For those concerned with escalation, it was another sign that modern warfare has expanded its perimeter far beyond the front lines, that seas and skies alike can be places of decisive action. On the human shore, The captain's confidence, the quiet competence that had once soothed him into anchoring in a remote canal, turned to a different ledger. He and his crew were accounted for. Some escaped with stories of how closely the sea and fear had brushed them. Others bore scars. For naval authorities and investigators, the wreck became a subject of examination and of rumor. For families of soldiers who might have been fed by the cargo, it was a cold, complex relief. Something lethal had been lost. Lives in towns that once feared the wrong kind of rain of metal might not be as endangered. The story of the Portolia 4 was not singular. It was, just an instance of a broader truth. In a world where sensors can unmask night and sea, and where drones can reach far beyond old borders, logistics are no longer a private matter. Supply lines, once thought safe because they moved by sea or by distance, can be interrupted by intelligence and delivered consequence from afar. The Caspian, once a quiet inland waterway for commerce, had become a theater, and a sunken freighter, weighed down by the ambitions of others, marked the difference between shadow and exposure. This is the human geometry of modern conflict, a lattice of decision and observation, in which machines and men, satellites and steel, mediate outcomes. The Portolia 4, a name now attached to a dark patch on oceanographic maps and to confidential reports in multiple languages, would be studied. Analysts would pore over satellite passes and signal logs, comparing passes and timings. Commanders would revise risk assessments. Families would speak of narrow escapes and of the peculiar luck of being at sea when the world above decides to reach down. In the end, what happened in the Vuhledon Canal was neither elegant nor theatrical. It was precise within a narrowed purpose, and it was brutal within the logic of denial. The drones had done what they were designed to do: find, strike, and deliver consequence. The sea had done what it often does: conceal and preserve. And for a moment, a captain's choice of anchorage that felt cautious and smart turned, in the cold math of surveillance and reach, into vulnerability. When reports filtered back, fragmented images, dates, and times stamped into the metadata of satellite feeds, the slow accrual of witness testimony from lifeboats and tug decks, the facts were simple and stubborn. 14 drones launched, the Portolia 4 listed and sank. Thousands of components and rockets now lay under the Caspian. The rest would be argument, strategy, apology, or justification, depending on the tongues that carried the tale. But the immediate result was a clear line drawn on the map. The old rule that the sea was a distant sanctuary had been redrawn, and with it, the contours of a conflict that had already learned to reach across oceans.